So it's exciting times in the world of rye. There has been two fall rye hybrids were put up for registration in February. They both passed with flying colors, and one has now been fully registered, and I think will be available in limited supply this fall. I guess I should give you my background. My name's Jamie Larsen. I'm the perennial cereals but also fall rye breeder based in Lethbridge. So part of my job as being a fall rye breeder is also to run the fall rye co-op trial, where basically varieties of rye are put in there, they're tested across Western Canada, and essentially then from there we take the data, it's analyzed, and then if varieties are better than the checks or equal to the checks, they're moved forward for registration. So I'm familiar with the hybrids because essentially that's what the test makes up right now. My program is quite new, so we aren't quite that far along in the breeding process. But I am familiar with the hybrids here, and so I'll just kind of talk a little bit about it. So two hybrids were put forward and accepted for support. They were Gatino and Brasetto. Brasetto is with FB Genetics, and that's what will be available this fall. So looking at the data across Western Canada, the yields of these hybrids are actually quite impressive. In some cases we saw yields in small plots, so you have to take that with a grain of salt, but of 10 tons or more. I really saw the yield potential in some of this stuff. So what we did to really try to push it is we actually designed a trial where we wanted to basically look at rye under sort of, I guess, conventional management or lower, kind of more, I guess, typical rye management versus quite intensive, and basically to try to push the yields and see where we could go. Basically, the trials laid out, the seeding rates are the same. We kind of kept them the same from that perspective. So approximately 200 seeds per meter squared. I think that's about basically about a bushel and a half. The rates that are recommended actually for the hybrids are lower than that, but we thought in Western Canada, their recommendations in Germany are lower than that, but in Western Canada with our winters, we thought we'd bump it up. But anyway, so what you have here is intensive and conventional treatments all the way through. The intensive, part of the intensive treatment is a seed treatment, so we went with Cruiser Max cereals. Across all the treatments, we treated them with, in the fall, we did a herbicide treatment of 2,4-D, and then in the spring, the intensive treatment got another herbicide on, as well as a fungicide treatment. What you notice here, the plots are a little thin. They had a fair bit of winter kill. In fact, they thought about writing off the trial, but they did come back, rise quite vigorous, and so you do see a bit here. My plots in Lethbridge, some people have seen them here, and they're actually, they look a little more full, and actually I think you can actually, when you go across them, see the differences between the intensive and conventional treatments. One thing you'll notice about the fall rye hybrids, they're not your typical rye, what you see. They're pretty uniform in general. That's, obviously the idea behind a hybrid. They're semi-dwarf, so they're shorter. They're not quite as short as rifle, but they're definitely quite a bit shorter than Hazlitt. The yield potential of these over the conventional rye are about 25 to 30% is what we saw. So there is significant yield potential here. Some of the things that we're looking at, so what we're trying to determine how much better they are, A, is obviously grain yield. People are interested in ergot, what is it compared to the regular OP varieties, falling number. But then the other things we're going to look at are, from a physiology standpoint, is basically looking at harvest index. So basically, what's the grain yield in relationship to the actually above ground biomass, with the idea that from the information I've seen that the hybrids actually are better at basically the ratio is higher. So basically, for the amount of biomass, more grain is produced, which is an important thing. That's what you're trying to do, is basically make the plant as efficient as possible, convert as much of that energy that it's receiving from the sunlight and turning it into grain. So, yeah, people have kind of any questions so far?
When you push fertility, is lodging an issue, or?
Well, in rye, generally, yes, I would say. You don't see any lodging here, and I don't see much in Lethbridge in my plots yet. The tall stuff Prima that people are somewhat familiar with, you'll see lodging. Hazlitt, you will see some lodging because it's taller. Obviously, lodging is generally correlated to height. Yeah, so in general, across Western Canada with the hybrids, you didn't see much lodging. So right now, this trial is growing here in Medicine Hat at Vauxhall and Lethbridge, but we were able to get funding, as I mentioned, and so this is through WGRF. We're going to have this trial at Indian Head, Melfort, Brandon, here, Vauxhall, and Lethbridge starting planted this fall for next year as well as the following year. So we'll have fairly decent data set in terms of looking at some of this stuff. It will be on small plots, but in the second year, if we can get enough seed and everything, we may try some large plots, especially at Indian Head and a couple other locations. So that might give some better information for farmers. What Ducks Unlimited is doing is they actually have this at another number of farmer locations across Western Canada, where basically they're just comparing, I believe, Bracetto and then Hazlitt or whatever rye the farmer's growing in 20-acre fields. So they're dividing it in half, and then they're managing it like winter wheat. So that'll kind of add to this data set, I think, in terms of giving people information, field scale versus small plots, and then that data will be available to producers to make their own decisions. So there are many fall rye growers here. Who grows fall rye? Yeah, I know Andy does, yeah. So
what levels of fertility are you using on the trials?
Right, should have said that. Sorry about that. Yeah. So in the fall, the intensive gets 60 kilograms per hectare of nitrogen. There's nothing put on the conventional, and then in the spring the conventional gets 60, and then the intensive, I believe, gets 100. So we're actually pushing the fertility quite high. Yeah.
Any phosphate?
Well, we soil test for that, so you keep the phosphate at 40 and then the potassium at 30. But yeah, that's all done soil testing in the fall. Yeah.
Was this on Chem Fallow or continuous?
I think this was on Chem Fallow last year.
Yeah, and that's what we had at Lethbridge too. Yeah.
Was the trial looking at total biomass rather than just grain yield, or?
Yeah, so we're actually going to sample, and so we'll take a look in a unit area, and that's what we'll get our harvest index information from. So we'll look at grain yield as well as the amount of biomass in a section and scale that up. Yep.
Have you seen much winter survival differences?
From the not this year. We didn't see any, no. And I'm not sure. I haven't seen the data for here yet. Whether you guys saw any difference between that. Yeah. The seeding date was September 27th, and in Lethbridge it was, I believe, October 5th. So when we had it in, so we didn't quite make the recommended early dates. What I will say about rye, though, it comes out of the ground like a rocket. So in comparison to winter wheat, it gets established quite quickly. And so that's one of the benefits. Not saying that you should ignore the recommendations for crop insurance, but from that perspective, it's interesting.
Is this strictly going to be a windrow, or any hopes of straight combine?
Well, so yeah.
It's going to shell.
Yeah. So in Germany, they straight cut everything, and that's certainly is the recommendation from KWS, the breeding company from Germany. And obviously I know that's a major concern for producers here. So we would certainly be more interested in seeing it straight cut, but if your normal management practice is swathing them, that's fine. I don't have a lot of experience from that perspective. I'll be honest with you. So whether it shells badly or if it's better, I don't honestly know. Any other questions?
How many plants per square foot were you targeting, or should you target?
So the Germans are basically talking about basically I think they're saying about 75 or 175 plants seeds per meter squared. So that's a little bit lower than the recommendations for winter wheat here. This specific trial was 250, and that seeding rate was basically the same across all the treatments. So we didn't vary that.
Are you guys ever looking to do any test plots on irrigation land?
So at Lethbridge they are under irrigation as well as at Vauxhall.
Okay.
So you're talking but full like farmer, yeah, I'm not sure if they have it on irrigated land. I don't know all the conditions for all the farmers across Western Canada.
I've always been so nervous to try to grow it on irrigation just for the simple fact that it getting 6 feet tall and all falling over, right? So
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I will say, the hybrids are a lot shorter, as well as rifle is quite a bit shorter. They don't lodge as much, I know that for sure. In Germany, though, their management obviously is much more intensive. They'll use a number of fungicides, but also growth regulators on it to keep it short. The average height across Western Canada for this stuff was about a meter. So roughly about this height. Any other questions? In terms of grain quality, the hybrids have excellent grain quality. One of the knocks against the Canadian open pollinated varieties is the falling numbers sometimes don't make the cut. With this stuff, the falling numbers are about 100 seconds higher, so on average it's in the kind of high 200s. And I have seen falling numbers where the Canadian stuff is in the high 200s, in the high 300s for some of this. So it certainly protects your ability to market your grain. Yeah.
How about ergot? Is the hybrid better or worse for ergot?
Statistically, they're not different than the open pollinated varieties. Previous hybrids that were tested in Canada had significantly higher amounts of ergot. And I have seen that a little bit in the trial, but statistically it's not different. Last year was quite a bad year for ergot across Western Canada, and they were no different than the open pollinated varieties. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to throw a few things in. Hi everybody, I'm Ken Cole. Sorry I missed the introductions. We were busy getting set up for the interactive module coming up a little bit later. You guys are going to have to help us out with some soil sampling. See, I got my beer belly dirty here. Sorry about that. I was clean this morning. One of the things that I found interesting, I wanted to make sure that all of you know about this too, because there is an optional part of the tour that we're going to have after lunch, and it's not on the hybrid fall rye, but Scott Lair behind us here was the driving force of looking into this, and what he's been doing is seeding winter wheat and winter triticale and then blends of that early sort of in August, and then grazing that once about October. So what we ended up doing was putting in a couple of research trials that unfortunately we didn't get funding for, but kind of lends to this whole idea of survivability and the differences between the fall rye and winter wheat. And I know it seems surprising when you move away from the mountains as you get into Medicine Hat. It's hotter summers and all that, but the winters are actually harder, and a lot of guys are struggling with winter survival even with winter wheat now. Whereas when you move into a triticale, there's that blend that has a little bit more winter hardiness, and the fall rye are very winter hardy. And in that grazing situation, we planted all three of those, plus a blend of different types of crops, and then we included a seed treatment, and Jamie actually could maybe talk a little bit about that right now too after we're done. The insecticide seed treatments, you may have heard anecdotal evidence that it improves winter hardiness, and sometimes it's cultivar specific, but so we've got that treated, and untreated. And then we had 2 identical trials, and one of the trials, the cattle were allowed to graze freely over it, and the other trial, we caged it off. And then we're going to evaluate sort of the biomass and then the ability to go back to grain. And I think in this area, the fall rye have a particular interest because the winter wheats and a lot of the farmers around here lost their winter wheat crops this year. It was pretty dry to start, and then a hard winter and lots of icing over throughout the winter. Whereas all of our rye plots, including the stuff that was grazed, has survived. So it's kind of a unique feature of the fall rye that might be a special opportunity for this area.
Yeah. So that Ken kind of mentioned the grazing of rye. That I think is something that is actually fairly common for rye. I think, especially as you get up further north. There's a lot of guys that do it that way. Like as I mentioned, rye really comes out of the ground quite quickly and gets established. So I think from a grazing perspective, it absolutely, in my mind, would be a good way to go and a good way to use rye. In terms of the seed treatment, I believe, did you find a significant increase in biomass from?
Yeah, it seemed we were close on the statistics side of things. We're 90% confident that the seed treatment increased the biomass yield of that early planted fall cereal. So you're actually creating more material from that seed treatment. And then of course, because you don't graze it until the recommended period, I think it needs 60 days or something like that. But to increase the yield, and then we had all of the different types analyzed at the lab for feed value. And I'm not a feed expert, but one of my colleagues told me that it was basically crack cocaine for cows. It was so rich in feed, and that it didn't kill them. It didn't give them a bad attitude or anything like that. But they certainly enjoyed that feed value. So it's such a neat opportunity. They call that a dual-purpose crop. You can graze that in the fall and then still harvest it for a full crop the following year. And we hope to continue some work on that. And I think, judging on this year, which I think was a rather tough year, the fall rye are basically bulletproof, whereas winter wheats, they didn't make it this year anyways. But it'd be nice to see that over the next couple of years with some more, I hope, normal type winters. Yeah,
the general. So the research in fall rye in terms of cold tolerance, and this is a great point, and really, one of the main benefits of rye for sure is it is a safer crop to grow as a winter cereal. So the work that Brian Fowler did, he looked at all this stuff across Western Canada over many years, and the most cold tolerant winter wheat from his research was probably 50% less cold tolerant than fall rye, and some of the fall ryes actually were significantly higher than that. So if it's something that you're concerned about trying a winter cereal and you're worried about that, well, fall rye would be one way to start, essentially, and make sure that you get something through the year. Fall rye, the interesting thing about it is that like Mike was saying, kind of had almost written this trial off for dead, but its ability to tiller and recover is demonstrated here. You'll probably get something out of it anyways versus just kind of ripping it up. So
yeah, I was actually happy that we had plots at all, considering how many farmers had to reseed their winter wheat trials. We had probably a weaker stand, and then whenever you have a weaker stand, other stresses really start to take over, and you can see we've got some downy brome in here that really kind of choked out a lot of that. On the good news on that is that I think that there is almost a silver bullet solution for the downy brome that will be available starting next year. And Brian Barris had this, actually Eric Johnson led it as part of an overall program that Dr. Brian Barris was leading. And the product active ingredient is called pyroxasulfone. And you mix that with your pre-seed burn down, and basically I was evaluating trials on this for 3 years, and it was literally bulletproof, no downy brome at all. And whereas with some of the other products, there were times where we did have good control and there were times that we didn't. So the consistency level is there, and it is going to be registered and available next year through I think FMC has the product, and it's going to be called Fierce. So that's another I think, good news story for the winter cereals in general when Downy brome or Japanese brome is a problem.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe if you guys are, if anybody is interested in sticking around after lunch to go out and take a look at Scott's plots, please come and talk to me. If there's no interest, we probably won't go. So just, even if one of you wants to go, we'll take you out there. So come talk to me at lunch or any time. And otherwise, maybe join me in thanking Jamie for presenting his projects.